Hey, welcome to Triangulation. This week, I think maybe one you're really going to want to keep. I know I'm excited about interviewing, I think, a guy who is probably more important to us geeks than almost anybody else. Randall Munroe, the creator of the Xkcd comic, is next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Triangulation, episode 412, recorded Friday, August 30th, 2019. Xkcd. Triangulation is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Hiring is challenging, but there's one place you can go where hiring is simple and smart. That place is ZipRecruiter, where growing businesses connect to qualified candidates. Try it free at ZipRecruiter.com/triangulation. It's time for Triangulation, and man, I am so excited about this show. His name may not be widely known as, let's say, cartoonist Charles Schulz's. But for a certain group of people, and I include myself, Randall Munroe is a cultural icon. When you mention Little Bobby Tables or horse stapler correct, people don't, it's like here I have a few of these. The temperature of the earth. It's iconic in the same way that Snoopy and the Red Baron is iconic for another generation. Randall Munroe is the geek's cartoonist. I hope that's okay to say. And Xkcd at xkcd.com is a must read. And it's rare that we have a subject, whether it's passwords or free speech or standards, that somebody doesn't paste an Xkcd into the chat room saying, well, Randall covered this much better. Randall Munroe, welcome to Triangulation. It's very nice to meet
Thanks
you.
for having me.
It's an honor to meet you. I feel like I'm meeting, I don't know, Gary Larson or, Bill Waterston.
Oh, no,
it's legendary. Legendary Randall Munroe. His book, a new book, the third in the series, How To, Absurd Scientific Advice for Common Real-World Problems, and I mean absurd. His previous book, What If, and Thing Explainer. Now, if you've done What If and How To, then you've got to do who, what, when, and why. Right?
Yeah, where, probably.
Where. Randall, welcome to Triangulation. Really an honor to meet you.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
As I mentioned, it's not at all unusual when somebody will come in the chat room and we ban somebody and they say, well, free speech, that we will point them to your comic on free speech. Or when we start talking about standards, then we'll point to your comic. Do you get to the point where you just say 1757 or 632?
No, I don't know. Mostly no. Occasionally people will say, oh, my favorite comic is number so-and-so, and it'll be, something. There are a few of them that I know by number, but I'm always a little surprised that when people expect me to know everyone by number.
Yeah. So one of the things that everybody loves about your stuff is that you are sound, scientifically sound, mathematically sound, computationally sound. You're rigorous. And so when
I do my best.
Yeah, well, it's impressive. We'll get to the book. I promise. Lots of plugs for the book coming. Everybody just, buy the book, and then we don't have to, just buy it. Just go out and buy it. You can get it on Amazon. There's even an audio version. I don't know how that would play. Do they describe the pictures?
It works great. It's Will Wheaton.
Oh, yeah. Well, if anybody could do it, Will could. Does he? How does he do? Does he describe? Does he read the comics? How does he? Yeah.
I think it varies depending on how integral it is.
Yeah. I love the drawings though. Did you study art?
I do not get that question very often.
Did you study stick figures?
No. I've been drawing stick figures since I was a little kid, and I feel like it's that I didn't study art. I regret past that. I just got more and more specific about how I drew them.
Yeah.
But no. When I was little, I thought it would be really cool to be a cartoonist, and the downside was. I thought, oh, that sounds like a great job. You can draw comics. People will see them. You can sit at home in your bathrobe. But then I realized two small flaws were I didn't know how to write jokes and also didn't know how to draw.
Well,
and I thought, okay, that probably that's probably enough reason to put that one aside. But yeah, and I don't know, you can make up your own mind about whether I got any better at writing jokes, but it turns out not being able to draw wasn't quite the kind of barrier I thought it would be.
Do you do your own lettering? Because the lettering is quite good.
Yeah, it's okay. No, I do my own lettering. I'm laughing because there's actually, I don't know, I've experimented some with fonts. So some of the lettering is with a font, but there are tricks to make it more irregular to match the lettering. But my handwriting does definitely changes over time, and I figure if I'm going to draw stick figures, at least some part of it has to be more labor intense.
Well, legible's valuable.
My favorite thing though was when I was Googling, because I've had a couple of different fonts of my handwriting that I've used for different projects, especially when we've done interactive April Fool's type things that have needed dynamically generated text. And I know that my lettering is just my handwriting block letters. I know that cartoonists, there's this whole art to lettering, and maybe it's less common nowadays, but that was a whole very serious profession that people had all kinds of, they knew how to letter write for comics. So at one point I was trying to see which version of the font had been released with my projects, and I Googled Xkcd font because I was trying to see which one was the one that was floating around that people would use. And I found a Quora question where someone asked, hey, what font does Xkcd use? And then someone who knew about cartooning responded, it's not a font, it's hand lettered, and not particularly skillfully. And I was like, ouch.
That's so Reddit.
I know it may not pass muster with people who really know about lettering, but it's my own block lettering handwriting.
Screw them. Although I have to say, this is a great blog post by Phil Elson on the metrics of your handwriting, probably more than you really would care to go into.
Yes, if you scroll back up, actually, right there. If you scroll up to the top of the page, there was a chunk of sample text.
Oh, let me go to that.
And
yeah,
where I wrote out, and I actually wrote that out at their request.
Oh, how funny!
Years ago. But what I got stuck on was, so they started saying, hey, we want to do, there was people who were trying to make a better Xkcd font, and I was like, oh, sure, that's cool. I'm happy to contribute. But one of the things that's hard is getting the spacing between the letters, especially because my letters tend to be kind of scrunched right up against each other. And in order to do that, I wanted a sample of text that would have as many common letter pairs as possible. And as is often the case with my projects, it sort of started to go off the rails because I got hung up on this problem of, if you want to write a sample of text that has every English letter in it, that's not too hard. There are many people who have solved that problem. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
Right.
But what about if you want something that has every pair of letters that appears in English?
Oh.
I hadn't found anyone who had tried to do this, or at least every pair that almost ever appears in English. Maybe there are some very rare pairs you could leave out.
So you could get the kerning right between F and L and things like that.
Because you don't need to worry about the kerning between like X and J.
Right.
That never comes up. But you do need T and T and L. So I took a giant sample of text and tried to write a tool that would generate a string of words that would have all of the different letter pairs that you might need without any wasted space, that would try to represent it in the minimal space possible.
And an amazing coincidence, unauthoritativeness, leatherbark, intercolic, microkelio, off cider is my password. So
yeah, probably change that. I hate to tell you. Well, what was great was that so first of all, this was one of the ones that I hit at some stage, one of my test phrases. But this problem turns out to be fairly hard.
It's a really interesting problem. Yeah.
A week later, I have given the font people nothing helpful, and I have generated a huge amount of data on like letter pairs and better and better ways to generate these combinations. And so I have, and surprisingly, at first I thought I was doing something wrong because I couldn't get a compact sentence that had many of the common pairs. But I think that it wasn't just that. It was that it really is hard to make a short sentence. There are just a lot of different pairs. But I got the font, and the people who were working on the font didn't get as much helpful guidance from me. But I now have a lot of code on my computer for generating pairs.
Did you do it in Python? What did you do it in?
Yeah, that was in Python.
Yeah.
I tend to use whatever tool I know how to use at the time. I'm one of those people who will like spend 10 hours doing something with a tool that I have an idea of how to use instead of like spending 5 hours to learn to use a better tool.
Right.
But that's always a balance that's hard to strike.
This is, by the way, why we love you, Randall. I mean, this is, in a nutshell, what makes Xkcd so incredible is it's something about your personality, I guess, that you go deep.
Well, I'm always looking to cut corners, but I always find the way of cutting corners that ends up being more work than the original. I guess I could have just written out every letter pair. There are only like 679 or 900 of them or something. But instead, I spent 2 weeks trying to figure out how to cut that down to like half the size.
And why cupcake? Why is cupcake in your font set? I don't know. I don't understand that.
I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing like it must just be something that had a good. Where is cupcake in there?
Yeah. Right.
No.
Yeah. Right here.
Wait, I'm not seeing it.
It's at the bottom. Let me scroll down a little bit here. See there, above E, and I think that's a cupcake with a cherry on the top. Maybe it's an ice cream soda.
Oh, no. I see. Yes, when the symbols. Sorry, I was looking for the word cake.
No, the symbol cupcake. It's the only emoji that you have.
There was I think at the time I did this, there was a debate over why there was no cupcake emoji.
Okay.
There was someone who was complaining about that.
You have only a cupcake emoji.
Yes, so I have only a cupcake emoji. I am endlessly delighted by the hopeless task that the Unicode Consortium has created for themselves. And it's one of those problems that like it's like they started out just trying to unify a couple of different character sets, and really before they quite realized what was happening, they were like grappling with decisions at the heart of how we use language, no matter how hard they tried to create policies to avoid these problems. Yeah. And I think that it's just really fun. It's just a fun example of how weird language is and how hard human communication is and how you can't really get around those problems. And so when I see them fighting over, which dinosaur emoji to include, or getting mad because people are using some symbol the way that they didn't want, I find that kind of delightful. And like, and the problems they grapple with in all this are really serious and hard problems, which is, of like, which languages do you include and how much work do you put into getting support? So these are really hard problems, and I do not envy them. And I also enjoy that they can be at the center of a firestorm over cupcakes.
Absolutely. Randall Munroe is our guest, the creator of Xkcd, the best geek comic online. His new book is How To: Absurd Scientific Advice for Common Real-World Problems. So you're an 11-year-old. You give up on your dream of becoming a cartoonist, but you became a scientist.
Well, I did a physics degree, an undergraduate degree at Christopher Newport University, and then I started working on robots at NASA Langley Research Center.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I did a summer internship there, and then the next year, one of the people who I had met on the internship hired me to work in a robotics lab.
Hardware and so or software?
It was one of those situations where I was mostly working on software, but then a lot of the time you'd like press the button and nothing would happen, and I guess I'm working on hardware now. But mostly what I worked on was we had a demonstration robot that was that was the robot where you could put all your sensors on it. If you had a NASA sensor you were working on and you wanted to show people, here's what this sensor can do, here's why it's cool, we have a real one, look at it. So our robot would be an example, that would just show off someone's cool sensors. So we had a bunch of different sensors that the robot didn't actually need to get around, because this robot was not going to go anywhere or explore anywhere. It was just capable of navigating around our office. But it had a whole bunch of extremely cool instruments on it.
Were you drawing during this time, or was that something completely not happening?
Yes, I was drawing during this time. I was good. I was not drawing, when I was supposed to be working on my robot. I did that at home. But I had started posting my comics actually the fall before I started working there. And I think I posted a few of them that fall and then took a break for winter break and then started up in earnest in the spring. And so the whole time that I was doing this, I was pulling comics from my old notebooks and doodling new ones on the side and posting those online. And it was kind of cool, but I just saw it as one of the many, dumb internet things I was doing. I didn't sort of expected to turn into a job as quickly as it ended up doing.
There was this period in the 90s where web comics were kind of the hot. They were like zines 10 years earlier. They were the hot thing. And there were a lot of web comics going on, even kind of predating the web.
There was an era that I wasn't really aware of them. So in the 90s, I was reading newspaper comics, and I was big into newspaper comic collections, and in the 80s too. But I started reading, I guess it was the early 90s. I started reading Calvin and Hobbes.
Oh yeah,
and I just read these as book collections. We didn't have a lot of TV in our house. We had a tiny black and white TV, so I didn't watch a lot of TV, and instead I read comic book collections. So I went to the library and I would just check out everything in the comics section. It wasn't really superhero comics, but like The Far Side,
Yep.
Calvin and Hobbes,
Yep.
Bloom County, etc. I mean, I read every Garfield strip published up until 1998 or whenever that they had in our library, which was collections 1 through 31 or something. I just devoured all of that.
So as opposed to comic books, those were really newspaper comics.
Yeah. I don't really know anything about like Marvel and DC comics. That's like an area of like pop culture that I just missed for whatever reason. I know lots of people who work in that area and are very familiar with them, but
everybody we work with is like Marvel fanatics. I don't either. But you asked me about Gary Larson or Calvin and Hobbes or even Garfield. I know all about them.
Oh yeah.
I guess there's a little schism between the two.
Yeah,
the two
I don't
groups.
know. I just think there's a whole bunch of different things that you can know about.
Yeah, there's a limit.
No one follows them all.
Although if anybody's a polymath, it's you, Randall. I mean, the breadth and depth of your knowledge is always amazing. Did you?
No. Well, I have the advantage that I only have to. This
is all you do.
I can just write the one fact I know about some cool area, and then everyone. I know all about it.
It's true. You don't have to teach a semester class in any particular subject. That does simplify it, doesn't it? So did you ever consider like going pro, so to speak, with going to the syndicates and saying I want to be in a newspaper?
I did, but I had also I had read stories about how hard it was shopping comics around. For these people who I read, who were my heroes, like. It was really tough. Bill Watterson, I think, shopped Calvin and Hobbes around for like 5 years while working day jobs before he finally got a deal.
Wow.
And like those weren't great deals. And he famously spent most of his professional career in these pitched and very like intense battles with the syndicate over licensing rights and stuff.
Yeah.
And then when he eventually quit, it was hard not to have the sense that part of it was just over like he had fought those battles and ultimately won most of them, but was just sick of it. And so to me, I had this sense of like, oh yeah, it's fun, but it wasn't like, oh, the newspapers, that's where you go, the big thing. I was sort of thinking, oh, that's that's where you go, and then you have to fight with your syndicates and editors, and like it didn't. I figured that it would just be a hard sell anyway, because I'm doing something that was like aimed at what to me felt like a very small slice of the population. Because when I started posting my comics, it didn't really occur to me that there were going to be a lot of people who would want to read them. I was just putting them online because, like many people in the early 2000s, I had a website and didn't really know what to do with it. But so when I had people who started reading my comics on my website, and then a few of them asked, "Hey, can I buy T-shirts?" It was sort of a surprise to me, and I was like, "Oh, sure." And I put up T-shirts for sale, and people were buying them. And to me, it seemed like, wow, this is a way better deal than, and I didn't have to spend 5 years fighting with anyone over this. People are just sending me money for my comics. Like it seemed like in general, like the business landscape was a lot friendlier on the internet. To people who were trying to reach a really niche audience, who were doing something that wasn't necessarily going to appeal to every newspaper reader, and so I just sort of thought, oh yeah, the newspapers are the deal they are. They have their pluses and minuses, but the internet has offered this really new great model.
So is that how you make all the money besides the books? The store, Xkcd store, is really how you monetize?
Yeah, it's gone back and forth where I'm making a living. And then since then I've gotten to know people who draw comics for newspapers and make a good living that way. I know people who will sell merchandise, people who do speaking engagements and tie-ins, people who do books, and it feels like it's changing all the time. So when people are like, do you have business advice? I never really know what to tell you. Like I know what's worked for me in my particular time and place, but I don't know how applicable that is to anyone else. One thing that's been really kind of surprising about publishing books is because I didn't go the newspaper route, I sort of had this idea, oh yeah, printed media, that's the old way of doing things, and everything's on the internet now. But with books, what's really surprised me is that they reach a lot of people who I think wouldn't have come across my comics any other way. People will leave books around and say that their kids are reading them, and their kids who I obviously don't know who's reading my website, but I think that I'm reaching, like when I do book signings versus when I do events that have to do with Xkcd, I feel like it's reaching a lot of people who wouldn't have reached my comics otherwise, or people who just came across them in a bookstore and don't really know that I draw an online comic. And that's really cool.
A smart sixth grader would love this book. This is such a good book to give a smart kid. And thank you. No, I've been really surprised by how much people are like, oh yeah, I like your book, but I can't tear it away from my kid. Yeah.
Which is funny because they'll ask me, oh, is this a good gift for kids? And the truth is, I don't really know anything about kids. I feel a little sheepish. Like I don't know what's good for what age level. And so people will tell me, oh yeah, my 7-year-old is reading your book. Do you think it's good? You think it's good for 7-year-olds? And I'm like, I mean, I guess it's good for your 7-year-old. There's nothing inappropriate, but like. I just sort of say I figure try giving it to the kid, and if they read it, then I guess it's a good age for them. If they're chewing on it, maybe wait a few years. But yeah, I'm surprised by how many little kids have come up and have clearly read my book cover to cover and internalized all this stuff, and it's so heartwarming. It's really sweet. But I definitely didn't expect it. If you had asked me, who are you selling this for? I would say, I don't know, people who are sort of like me. Right. That's my vaguest idea of who I'm writing for.
It's not written for kids. I want to be very clear about that. But that's what's great about Xkcd in general. It's not written for anybody except us. It's kind of like, if it's written for you. And I just could see a smart kid discovering this and it changing their whole outlook on life. And
that's really sweet.
No, I'm sincere. And I think that you will see in 20 or 30 years, you'll meet people who say, I got to tell you, I'm a scientist now because of you, or I'm a you know, an astrophysicist because of you, or whatever, or a flight attendant because of you. So anything can happen, I guess. Randall Munroe is our guest. When did the name Xkcd happen? Was that for the comics, or was that just your website?
That was actually, it predates both of those. When I started using the internet, it was pretty early, a combination of early and when I was very young. Because I know my family got on AOL in 1993.
When you were about 8.
I can remember, and I can pin down the year because I remember joining the first kids chat room on AOL. And when people would type ASL, and I didn't, I learned what that meant.
Yes.
And I remember typing 9, and that's vaguely horrifying, to our, now that we all have all the things we worry about. But I think there were just like 10 other kids online who were all just trying to find kids to chat with.
It was innocent then. Yes, absolutely.
No, it was fun, and so I was on the internet early, and so I would pick a name based on a thing I was reading that was really cool, because I discovered, on the internet you have to pick usernames.
Your handle, yeah.
Right, and so I would pick, something from a book I was reading. I know at one point I changed it to I was Skywalker 4 on the AOL Kids chat room.
Nice.
And then I started reading Animorphs, and I was really into Animorphs, and so I was Animorph 7. And then I would just step through. Every time my interests changed, I would have to change my username. And that was a huge pain because I had gotten used to a username. And I started realizing, like, wait a minute, I need a username that's not tied to whatever book series I'm reading at the time. And so I would, because this seems like a problem that's coming up over and over because there keep being new services. And I thought, well, what I really want is something that's very short and easy to type. And my first thought was I'll come up with a cool name that'll just be my nickname online. And so, maybe I was like 13 and I came up with a cool name that didn't mean anything. It was just a name. And then by the time I was 15, I learned that a name that sounds cool to a 13-year-old doesn't necessarily sound cool to a 15-year-old. And I was like, okay, what I really just need is a string of characters to identify me that will have no clear meaning attached to it.
Yeah.
So that way, I won't age out of it. It'll just be like a code that identifies me, and I can just register it on every service and I'll solve this problem. And so I just started going through looking for all the 3-letter strings at that point were taken on either AOL Instant Messenger or web domains. So I started looking at 4-character strings, and I had a couple of criteria that were, I wanted something that was not going to have characters that were easily mixed up with each other. So no O's because those look like zeros, and no I's because a capital I and a 1 look similar.
Yeah.
And also nothing that looked like it had an obvious pronunciation, and nothing that looked like an easy to decode acronym. And so I tried a few different things and eventually settled on Xkcd, registered that as my screen name, and used it through, high school or whatever.
Perfect. So you're Xkcd.
Yeah. Well, so then I was thinking, this is great. I finally solved the problem of Xkcd being unambiguous, of names being ambiguous or having multiple names for something. This will just be me everywhere, unambiguously. But then it was the name of my website, xkcd.com. And so when I started posting comics there, it by default kind of became the name of my comic. Like, I needed to put a label at the top of the site. And I was like, oh, this is xkcd.com. And then I was like, well, the .com is kind of superfluous. This is just Xkcd. And it works great as a name for a comic for sort of the same reasons that it was a good screen name, but I have immediately ruined my own plan of having an unambiguous identifier. So now I have to go, now I'm once again identifying myself with the name of a piece of media. It's just now a piece of media that I created.
You made. So that's not so bad, Randall. Come on, that's not so bad.
It's not so bad, but then if it actually starts to feel weird if I'm using it as a screen name, because I talk to people, but it's like, it feels like, yes, I, the human personification of the comic strip Xkcd. Like, it just feels weird to be using that in casual conversation.
It's like if Bill Watterson called himself Calvin.
Yeah,
that
exactly. That would feel a little strange.
Yeah.
Or, it's almost more like, though, if he called himself Calvin and Hobbes.
That would really be weird.
That would just, like, he could, it's fine. It's just, that would feel weird.
Yeah.
And so it started feeling weird as a screen name.
I look at all the screen names in our chat room, and people pretty much are frozen in time. Once you create a screen name and it becomes widely used, you're stuck. And I'm thinking there are a lot of people in our chat room who wish they weren't, Tech Dino or Eric Duckman or Beatmaster or Loquacious One, but you can't change it now. That's you.
It's sort of like how the area code you got in 2006. Yeah. That was like the last area code you ever had.
Forever.
No matter how you move around, you'll still have an area code that says that you're from Idaho.
Well, you chose well, because Xkcd is pronounceable, memorable, and even though you didn't know this in 1994 or 5, Googleable, uniquely Googleable, and that makes it perfect, really.
Yeah, it worked out well. I feel like it worked out for sort of the same reasons. Like, I didn't have anything in mind for it, but I was like, this seems like a problem that comes up over and over. Sort of like this is one of those situations where I once again, though, was overthinking things, because it's sort of like, oh, I want to have a string of words that has every letter pair in it. I'm going to way overthink this and spend forever on this problem, even though I could have just skipped it and it turned out not to be important. I feel like I did the same thing where I'm like, I need to figure out the way to generate a string that'll identify my project, identify me uniquely. And I spent way too much time thinking on it. It's like the one time it was actually appropriate, and I ended up using that a lot.
We're starting to get a little insight into the mind of Randall Munroe, and I'm really enjoying it. It reminds me of 1101, which, of course, you know as baby names. The names for our daughter, Ponzi.
Oh, yeah.
Emily, firefighter.
I have so much fun just giving dumb names to things.
It's so good. Sound of record scratch.
Yeah, I like the ambiguity of whether you're supposed to write out sound of record scratch with the bracket in it, or whether it actually represents the sound of a record scratch. But I think that maybe my favorite spread in my book, Thing Explainer, which is where I explain things using simple words, is that I got to do a tree of life where I assign names. I showed how all these animals are phylogenetically related, animals, plants, other kinds of life, but then also got to give names to all of them. And so in this book, the gimmick was that I was explaining and labeling everything using only the 1,000 most common words. And that was fun because it meant that I had to put things in simple terms and avoid technical jargon. But then sometimes it also meant that I got to explain things. I had to give things names where everyone knew what it was, but I had to come up with a name for it that fit the 10,000 most common words in English.
1,000.
Sorry, the 1,000 most common. 1,000, how I had to write it, because the word 1,000 didn't make the cut.
1,000's not on that list. 1,000.
Yeah, and so I had to name all these animals, and so I had like a porcupine was a pointy cat, and then
you know what I love? Your publisher, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, is using illustrations from your book now in high school chemistry, biology, and physics textbooks.
Yeah,
Isn't
it's
that
really
awesome?
cool. They took some of the Thing Explainer illustrations and some new ones. It's fun because when I was doing these, that's a book of big, complicated charts of things.
Right.
And I grew up with all these posters that are like, here's the space shuttle and how it works. Here's how, an ocean, the cutaway of, an ocean landscape, and here's how the waves break, and here's a coral reef. I really loved, because I loved poring over the details of those charts, and I would really internalize them. And then with Thing Explainer, I wanted to make something where it was fun, educational and stuff, but that there were just tons and tons and tons of little Easter eggs and little details that you could find by poring over it. And so I was thinking of myself as a kid reading those, looking at those charts, and I wanted to make something kind of like that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's why I think a smart kid would be like, feel like this is the other thing that's great about you, is you're not mainstream. You are, of course, mainstream, but you're not mainstream. And so somebody could feel like they've discovered you. And I think that's really special, because this kid that gets this book, How To, it's like, I found something nobody knows about. And it's really, that's really cool. Do you know what I mean? I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I don't know, like, everything is sort of like, there's no book that most people have read,
Right.
It's
Right.
so like everything is niche if you step back far enough, I guess, is how I look at that.
You actually, at the very beginning of the new book, which is called How To, Absurd Scientific Advice for Common Real-World Problems, talk about what most people know, and that there's 10,000 new people every day that don't know something that most people know. So
yeah, that's the United States, roughly based on birth rates and demographics.
So don't assume everybody knows anything, right?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, this is something that my mom told me when I was little. Like, I said I didn't know a word, and she kind of laughed, and she was really surprised. I was in high school or whatever, and she was like, "Didn't you just get a good English score on something? And how do you not know that word?" And then later she took me aside and apologized and was like, "Hey, I'm really sorry. You know what? I really try never to make fun of someone for admitting that they don't know a word or admitting they don't know something. I think that's really wrong. And so I don't want to do that. I don't ever want to do that, and I just wanted to apologize." And I really, and it was funny because that was one of the few, like she didn't do that a lot, but this was something she felt really strongly about, is not making fun of people for admitting that they don't know something. And what she was getting at there, the reason that's important is that making fun of someone for admitting they don't know something doesn't make them think, "Oh, I should know more things." It just, because everyone is always learning stuff, and everyone starts out not knowing things. And so when if there's something that, oh yeah, everyone knows this by the time they reach adulthood, then what I worked out was that in the U.S., for example, there's 10,000 people every day who are learning it for the first time. And so if you look down on people who are learning something for the first time, or who admit they don't know something because they learned it particularly late in life, all you do is you teach them to avoid revealing to you when they're having those moments.
Right.
And then you miss out on the fun of getting to tell them about a really cool thing they didn't know about. And, getting to be there when they discover that, oh, when you drop Mentos into Diet Coke, it makes a really cool fountain. And so I always like to encourage, and my New Year's resolution a few years ago was, when someone uses a word I don't know, to ask what it means.
Yes.
And it was really hard. It actually,
it's hard to admit ignorance. Yes.
But I learned a bunch of new words.
Yeah.
It's really great.
No, it's funny you say that, because I do the same thing now. Yeah. What does that mean? Instead of pretending I know.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But it's really hard. It takes a lot of confidence. I really had to make it a resolution.
You have to know all the best words. What?
Yeah, I didn't want to.
Was your mom a teacher? That sounds like something a teacher would say.
No. She. I think she just had the right.
Good instincts.
Yeah, good instincts about when how to treat people.
She did something right. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. Our guest, Randall Munroe, the author of three, I guess one too many, right? Books. His third is How To, Absurd Scientific Advice for Common Real-World Problems. It comes out September 3rd. So if you're watching this early, you might have to wait a little bit, but it'll be available on Amazon. As you mentioned, Will Wheaton does the audio book of it. And, of course, there'll be ebooks as well. How To, Randall Munroe, published by Riverhead Books. Our show today brought to you by ZipRecruiter. We just used ZipRecruiter again. We have such great results with ZipRecruiter. We just hired a production assistant using ZipRecruiter. Hiring is hard, and if you're the person at your company that's responsible, I don't have to tell you how hard it is. Phone calls, your inbox gets jammed. Usually you're doing this when you're down a person. It might even impact you directly, so it's like double the work. I got to point you to ZipRecruiter. We've had such great results with ZipRecruiter. It makes it so much easier. First of all, ZipRecruiter posts to all the biggest job sites, 100 plus job sites. So one post, and you're getting everywhere, including Twitter and Facebook and everywhere. So that way, it's more likely the right candidates will see your job posting. It makes it much more likely you're going to find the perfect person. I guarantee you the perfect person's out there. It's just a matter of finding them, right? But then the best part, one of the best parts is they don't flood your inbox. They don't flood your phone message system. All of these applications go into the ZipRecruiter interface, which makes it really easy to scan through it. You can even have screening questions, true, false, multiple choice, even essay questions to eliminate candidates that just don't make the grade. And then there's a new thing they do that's just really cool. They have powerful matching technology. They will scan thousands of resumes they already have, because a lot of people come to ZipRecruiter to apply for a job, to find people who have the right experience. Then they invite them to apply to your job. As applications come in, ZipRecruiter analyzes each one and highlights the top candidates, so you never miss a great match. This has been our experience, and it's really amazing. ZipRecruiter is so effective. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in the first day. In our case, often within a few hours, we'll start to get these really great candidates rolling in. It's kind of miraculous. You got to try it. Get started with ZipRecruiter right now. You can try it free when you go to ziprecruiter.com/triangulation. It's a great way to show your support for Triangulation if you like our show, but it's also a great way to try something that's going to change your recruiting experience. ZipRecruiter.com/triangulation. ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter.com/triangulation. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And we know that from actual experience. We just hired somebody through ZipRecruiter. It's pretty cool. Now back to my guest, Randall Munroe, the creator of the amazing Xkcd comic. In 2012, your fiance was diagnosed with breast cancer out of the blue. And so not every Xkcd comic is fun or lighthearted or educational. Sometimes they're very both moving and funny. And this was the comic you wrote back then. It's Causes of My Emotion by Year. And when you're young, Joss Whedon can be a big part of it, being wrong on the internet. But cancer, then, how's everything? Is everything okay now?
Yeah, everything's going well. And I usually shy away from
personal.
Getting, or at least without the remove of, I do a comic about something and you don't know whether it's something happening to me right now or something that happened years ago that I'm thinking about, or something happening to a friend or what. But I didn't want people to worry, because I was, if you learn a lot about cancer and about biology, it's I wanted to write about it a little bit and to do comics about it. But I felt like it would be wrong to be ambiguous when people were going to,
why is he writing about this? What's going on?
Is he okay?
Yeah.
What's going on? Yeah. So I did post a little bit about that, just to try to give people a little bit of context for why I was doing some comics about oncology all of a sudden.
It is probably difficult to. You've done a good job of separating your personal life from your comics. I think we get a very good picture of what's the weird mind of Randall Munroe, but we don't get a whole lot about who you are. And I noticed you don't. It doesn't sound like you want to talk too much about that.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I feel like I see it when a lot of people listen to you. It can be tempting to overshare. I don't know.
I know all about that.
Think,
yes.
Oh, everything I have to say is good and important, and I'm going to go and share it and tell everyone what I'm thinking at this very moment.
Yes.
And I feel like that's a power that I should not. I should not give into the temptation to use too much, because I feel like that. I feel like that's always been my feeling. I think it's almost like every other day we see another example of this person should probably have just stepped offline for a little bit instead of really doubling down on this argument.
Do you have a Twitter account?
No. There are some great there are feeds and there are bots that aggregate comics, and I've always been a big proponent of people sharing my comics around, especially early on. When everyone was watermarking them and stamping them with like, this is copyright so and so, don't reproduce this on a website without permission and so on. And like before people really figured out that you want people to share your comics around.
You're Creative Commons. All your stuff is Creative Commons.
Them Creative Commons, and I've always been pretty chill about that kind of thing.
Ever approached by a TV production company to make the Xkcd show?
I am trying to imagine what that would look. It's funny. I don't really know anything about animation or video, and
you don't need to. Neither did Matt Groening. It worked out.
I don't know. I feel like he probably got a little bit of a handle on it at this point.
By now, 30 years later.
Well, what's funny is I feel like it's a totally different medium to me. I grew up reading newspaper comics, and I don't have a good sense for TV or for animation or for how that stuff works. I did my one experiment with animation was when I was thinking about how you have comics that update every day or week or whatever their schedule is. And then there are movies which also show you a sequence of images, but they update 24 times a second. And I was thinking, what would it look like to be exactly in between those two? Because they're sort of the same thing, just with a different delay.
Right.
And so I did a comic called Time, which was a single panel, which just changed every hour.
Wow.
And I still don't know whether you're better off calling it a movie, like an animation, or a comic. People can categorize it however they want. But it was fun because I got to have a story where it starts off like, oh, this is just a picture of some people building sandcastles for some reason. And then as it goes on, I had little things that I had put in at the start where I was trying to hint that if you keep watching, there's more that's happening.
That's so cool.
And then
that's so cool.
And so it played out over the course of 3.5 months, I think, and ended up being like 3,000 individual panels, all of them.
Is there a way we can, because we're seeing the last, it says the end. We see the last panel.
Yeah. It was an event. It does update every hour still, but it's just the thing on the left is shifting a little bit in the wind. Yes, if you search for Xkcd Time viewer, or if you click on the comic, actually, I think that it will take you to one of the viewers. But a whole bunch of people who got very into it built these really cool viewers that let you. So this one has all the different frames, and you can do different speeds moving through it. You can and they have all the frames categorized, and it's really cool. You can like custom, pause on frames that have dialogue in them or whatever. But
I love your experiments. You are always experimenting. I think that's really cool. I guess that's the scientist in you, I guess, or something.
I don't know. It's just fun to mess around with stuff.
Yeah. And you got your first book came kind of out of an experiment, right?
Yeah. Well, which depends on what you count as first.
Thing Explainer, was that your first or no? What if? What if was
I
first?
also published a collection of Xkcd comics through this little sort of a friend's project called Bread Pig that had never published a book before. So it was like semi self-published, semi like not a traditional publisher, not a traditional book. But yeah, What If was my first book with a traditional publisher.
But that was a blog first, so that in a way was also an experiment, right? You said,
yeah, exactly. I wasn't at first because I just noticed that people would write in with questions for me. And they would, and it was sort of like they would have something they've been arguing about with their friend. Like, hey, if you threw something at Superman at the speed of light and he were trying to dodge out of the way, would he be able to move quickly enough, or something like that? Or could he deflect it? Or would it take, they would ask some question, and they've been arguing about this for a while, and they wanted someone to settle it for them. And they would say, but this seems like it's not a good enough question to bother a real scientist with.
So we'll bother you.
You write about science stuff, but all this, you write about weird stuff that isn't really important, right? It was sort of a little bit you could take it as insulting, but I was just excited because as soon as they asked me the question, I want to know the answer too. And so people would write in, and I did a comic about this phenomenon where as soon as you show someone a problem that they think they could solve, where they think they know the answer but they aren't sure, it's like I feel like for me it's like getting a song stuck in my head. It just takes over, and I want to, like, even if I'm not going to do anything or even give them the answer, I want to know the answer. And so I'll drop everything and spend 6 hours working on trying to solve it. And so I found that people were writing in with these questions, and I was taking so long solving them and writing up my answers. And oftentimes they were like, "Oh, we actually settled that argument. We've moved on," But I was like, "Hey,
apparently Randall has not."
Writing this thing. I should post these online so someone else can read them.
Yeah.
And also, hey, I could solicit questions. I bet people have more, because these are just people who wrote to me blindly, like guessing, an email address and maybe the guy who draws Xkcd can settle this for us. So I started soliciting questions, and boy, did people have a lot. And they were so cool. And so I got to, pick through them and find cool questions, do a bunch of cool research, and then write it all up and try to share it with people. And then that I started that as my blog, and then published a book of questions both from the blog and from new ones that people had submitted.
I use your stuff all the time. I don't know if you consider yourself an educator, but I use your stuff all the time. Lately, a lot of people have been asking about radiation, 5G towers, all of that, and your radiation dose chart, which you are quick to say, I am not an expert, but this is incredibly useful to give people an idea of the orders of magnitude we're talking about here. You get more radiation from a banana than you do from a cell site.
And I do try to be very careful about, I do my best to write about cool science stuff I've learned, but when it's something that concerns like health and safety or medicine in a way that, like, I don't ever want to like give people bad medical advice or whatever. In the case of my chart of radiation doses, that was sort of a collaborative thing. I just put it up as an image, but it's credited to both me and also Ellen McManus, who was a reactor operator at the Reed Research Reactor. And she helped with, she was saying she was frustrated by trying to explain radiation doses to people, and wanted to know if I could help her figure out a better way to show it. And so we collaborated on putting this together. But that's the kind of case where, like, I'm happy if you want to ask me about like what would happen if you crash the moon into Mars, I'll do my best to answer that. That sounds fun. But if it's something like, hey, what radiation doses are safe, I do want to have talk to an expert. We've got someone weighing in. Reasonable. So Ellen was extremely helpful there, and that was a lot of fun working with her on.
Yeah. I've used this timeline of Earth's average temperature to explain climate change. This is one you like to do these long comics, long scrolls, and I love them too, because they're really great for magnitude, to get a sense of time going by and so forth.
And that's I think that comic might be the single most viewed thing I have ever posted on the internet.
No kidding.
It's hard to measure, and I don't keep super detailed web stats, but that's my best guess. I think that is probably it. And that one, I mean, of course, that's a contentious issue, to say the least.
Yes.
And so that one, I really consulted with a number of climatologists and really spent a long time trying to make sure that I would, get it right. And like, there are always a lot of editorial decisions involved there, but I wanted to make every part of that comic something where I did it that way. I have checked. I have, done my research. I know what I'm putting in. I know what what's being simplified or not simplified, or what we're sure about, what we're not sure about, and that I can stand behind all of those choices. So I really worked hard on that one, and I'm really glad to see that it went around so widely.
You're not overtly political. I think, if anything, you're on the side of science.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's. I really don't think about it that way, because like everything is political, and politics is just sort of the process by which we all figure out what the heck we're going to do as a society with collective, decision making. So I don't know. I mean, what I feel like is it is hard to be funny and heartfelt if you're feeling angry or kind of preachy. I think that it's really it's sort of like social media. Like it's if you do it mad, you don't make the best decisions. So, but what I found in general is that I try not to weigh in on something if I don't have feel like I really have something to contribute aside from my immediate, strong political feeling on whatever it is I'm talking about at the time. And so, like with the Earth temperature timeline, I have all kinds of strong opinions on climate change and things. And I've done a couple of comics about climate change and climate science and understanding it. But I try to do that when I really feel like I have something to say that's different from what every other person is screaming about. But I do weigh in on political things sometimes. I just try not to do it just because I'm upset. I try to do it because I think that that what I have to say is helpful, and because otherwise it's just so easy to give into the temptation to just lecture people, and no one likes being lectured to, and everyone can tell when you're doing that. Right.
Do you do a comic a day? Do you feel like there's an imperative to do a certain number of comics?
I have a schedule of I post updates 3 days a week.
3 days a week. And
I've
you
had
try
that
to keep to
from the
that?
beginning. Yep. I've had my 3 comics a week since roughly the spring of 2006.
See, that would be the thing that would be challenging for me to do is be able to come up with a joke every day or 3 times a week for years.
Yeah, well, what really impresses me is, all the comics I read growing up, they did them 5,
crazy,
or 7 ending. There's the 6, weekday strips plus a Sunday strip,
right?
And a lot of their comics have more lines than mine. So,
well, to be fair, a lot of them aren't very funny. So, how often do you read the comic page and you go, "I haven't laughed. There's no laugh here."
But then you see someone like Bill Watterson would do.
Brilliant.
It's perfect, flawless.
Yeah.
Cartooning, draftsmanship, and incredible writing, and
insight.
That schedule.
And insight.
It makes me feel. Yeah, I know, and I'm like. People are like, how do you do this 3 times a week? And I'm like, how did they do it 7 times a week? Yeah.
Do you get comic block?
I don't know. I guess I don't know anyone. I feel like I'm always I always have a bazillion half finished ideas floating around. And for me, part of the benefit of deadlines is it forces you to pick out. Okay, I know that I'm going to have to pick out 3 of these this week that I really like, and make them work.
Wait a minute. So you maybe you have 4 or 5 good ideas, and you just do 3?
Maybe I have 2 ideas, and I do
2.5.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I feel like it's sort of like people will ask a lot of the time, like, where do you get your ideas? And it seems like the one question that every cartoonist or every writer or whoever gets asked. And I've never heard anyone with a good answer to it. I think
what's interesting is that you don't, unlike Bill Watterson, there's nobody demanding. Where's deadline? You're self-imposed deadline.
Yeah.
And yet you do it. You don't even get paid by the strip.
Well, the way that these things, the payment structure for Bill Watterson or for comic syndicates or people who sell, it's always really weird and disconnected.
Okay.
When if if you draw comics through a newspaper syndicate, really you're getting paid when people look at ads for washers and dryers,
Yeah.
And like that's weird and indirect and variable. So like, I mean, I think sometimes about how I talk to academics who do peer review, and I'm like, this is a huge time commitment that you're giving to your field, and there people will take advantage of you if you're a good reviewer and have you review more stuff. And it's not something you're getting paid for. You're just doing it because when you publish a paper, you're going to have, you're going to get other reviewers. But then there's also this giant weird journal system that's making money off of this, but also it all seems to work. But it doesn't seem like, if you look at it from an economic standpoint, like any part of the system really makes sense. It's just everyone is doing their research because they're at a university and they're expected to do some research, and they're doing peer review kind of for the same reason. And like, to some extent it's because they want to do it. To some extent it's because it's part of their job, which they're being paid for. But like, if they didn't review papers, they'd still get paid. They just have colleagues who are mad at them, I guess. And so like, I don't know, I feel like when you drill down into like why we do things and what we're getting paid
it's not for the money.
It often doesn't make nearly as much sense as it sort of does on the surface.
We do it because we love it. You obviously love what you're doing. And
and it's really lucky to be able to do it and get paid. And so I feel like however I get paid, I'm lucky. However I'm able to make money,
because I can pay the rent and go out
so
to
much
eat
of it
once
is
in a while. Yeah,
having been in the right place at the right time, and I really appreciate that. So I don't like to,
You have a unique.
I don't like to feel entitled or anything like that.
You have a unique talent. You have a real ability, and I think one of the tests of that is how many of your strips are kind of enshrined permanently, like your password strip, Correct Horse Battery Staple, which comes up again and again and again, or your standards strip. There's some of these they live forever. They're classics already, which says this is more than a comic strip. There's something very powerful going on. Do you have some favorites that you wish were more popular? Do you have some that you're like little special children?
No, I mean, I don't know. I never wanted to be one of those bands who's like, stop asking me to play this one song. I'm sick of it. I want to play this song, and you're all idiots for not liking it. Like, I'm just happy when people like any of my comics. Seriously.
But are there some that you're surprised that maybe you thought this was really great and people didn't get it, or?
No. Well, one thing that happens is there are a few comics like that you mentioned where I feel like I was like explaining the same thing over and over, and then to various friends or various random strangers who I got in arguments with. And I was like, I should do a comic to try to like explain this as concisely as I can. And I wasn't really thinking of it as then I'll have a thing I can point them to. But it was also sort of like, okay, maybe other people will now be able to bring this comic up in arguments.
Yes.
And that means I won't be tempted to jump in myself to like get involved.
They just say xkcd.com/925. That's all I'm going to say on this. And then they know.
Some of my... I think some of my personal favorite comics that are not about tech stuff or don't get the same like becoming a shorthand for something, but that I have a lot of fun with are there's a series of comics. I have this character with the beret who has a business. And there have been a series of comics about this business and its many surreal activities, and those I just have so much fun drawing and writing.
Beret guy. So even though these are stick figures, they do start to assume a persona, don't they? There's a bunch of beret guys.
Yeah, people assign them, and people assign them names and stuff. But it's a lot of the time it'll be a stick figure from one comic to the next, and you don't know if it's necessarily the same one or a different one or what.
Yeah, your beret guy is your surreal character. I think.
Yeah. That's. I think that it's several people who I know, and that I aspire to.
It's great. Randall Munroe, it's such an honor to talk to you. I thank you so much for the work you do, and I think I get a little bit of a better sense of the person behind the comics.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, it was great chatting with you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Real pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
The book, the new one, there are several, but the new one is How to Absurd Scientific Advice for Common Real-World Problems, the only book in the world for which the final chapter is how to get rid of this book. It is fun. I guarantee you there's a 7th or 8th grader, maybe a 6th grader, who knows, maybe a 4th grader in your life who would have their life changed by it, but you will also. It's just funny and fun and painlessly educational, like everything Randall does.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's Xkcd.com.
Really glad you enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, always. And I really enjoyed meeting you and talking to you. Thank you, Randall.
Well, likewise. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we could make this work.
I'm glad we could make this work. I am too. Take care, Randall.
You too.
I'm so glad we had this time together. Take care.
I don't do meetings. I never know the meeting speak. Like whenever I
how
start
do you get out of the meeting? Yeah.
Yeah, like what are you supposed to say at the very end?
So do you really? Wikipedia says you're into kite photography. That can't be current. Is that current?
I was into that in the sort of before drones were really affordable, that was one of the only ways I could think of to get a camera up really high in the sky.
Right.
I haven't done anything with kite photography recently. No.
Kind of what I thought. And you do credit, oddly, Alexis Ohanian and Serena Williams for the drone. What's the story there? Did they give you a drone?
Yeah. So I had a chapter on how to hit drones with tennis balls and with sports equipment. Oh. So the idea was one of those drones flying around your yard and you don't know what it's doing there, and it's like one of those wedding photography drones. So someone nearby is like flying over your house, annoying you with the noise, taking pictures, whatever, and you're like, you want to get rid of it. But all you have is your garage full of sports equipment. I got interested in the question of what projectile that you might have around the house is the most effective for taking down a drone. And I got data from a bunch of sports science papers on accuracy at hitting targets in a bunch of different sports and got to use those to compare them. But I didn't have tennis. And I had gotten a text from Serena's husband and mentioned, oh yeah, it's fun. I'm actually buried in the middle of tennis research right now. And so he said, oh yeah, well, hey, if there's any way we can help out, Serena's happy to help. And I was like, hey, yes, I don't have data on pro tennis player accuracy at hitting a target. I don't suppose you could next time you're down at practice. And she was happy to help. And I was just hoping that she could hit the ball at a target on the wall just a couple of times, videotape it, show how far away from the center it hit, and then I could use that to build a model for accuracy. But instead, she got an actual drone,
a Mavic 2,
and had it fly above the court while she was practicing. Yeah. And she put it a certain distance away and got me the measurements, and then served the tennis ball at it until it hit, and got to verify. And I hadn't tried this, so I was a little curious. But a tennis ball will absolutely knock a drone out of the sky. But especially when it's served by the world's greatest tennis player.
Serena hit it in 3 tries and knocked it clean out of the air. And then I love the final cartoon of her. And rarely do your cartoons look like somebody, but it's pretty clear she's hitting Alexis in the head.
Well, so I talked to a robot ethicist about this, who because it was sort of weird, you when you see the drone lying on the ground with the broken propeller,
it's kind of sad.
Kind of sad, but like I built robots, I know these things don't have feelings,
right?
But it still feels weird to destroy one and kind of gleefully, I'm not entirely comfortable with that. And I talked to Dr. Kate Darling, at MIT, who's studies the ethics of human-robot interaction, and got her to weigh in on it. And she made some really good points about how the way we treat robots as they become more lifelike reflects on us. And people who are watching you gleefully destroy a robot will infer sort of how you treat things that seem to be alive, and that maybe that's worth reflecting on a little. And also pointed out, like, because the robot isn't the problem here. The robots aren't. We assign so much agency to them, but the robots are generally controlled in one way or another by a person who is the real one exerting power. So hitting a tennis ball at the drone is really not solving the problem at its source.
It's
you
a
wanna
proxy.
find
It's a proxy for Alexis, and so she at the end she takes out Alexis. Actually, that's a fascinating topic, and you've done a little bit on Amazon Echo and listening, but I think it'd be interesting because I hear parents all the time teaching their kids to apologize to the Amazon Echo for being curt. And I want to say, no, that's a machine. You want to teach them it's a machine, not that it's human. It's exactly the wrong way to think about it.
Well, it's tricky. It's I think it's just generally a very tricky issue. Like it's the way we relate to we relate to computers as they imitate people, and the norms we develop around that. It's an ever evolving field. It's part of why I was happy to highlight Kate's work on this, because she's been thinking about this for a long time.
Awesome to have you. I really appreciate it, Randall Munroe.
So great to be here.
Take care, Randall.
Thank you so much. You too.
I see a tripod. Are you a photographer too?
No, I do some photography, but that one is not mine. I don't know whose that is.
Left over in the WeWork. Okay, never mind, man. Take care, Randall.
No, yeah, you too.
Bye-bye. I didn't even ask you, like, how do you draw? Do you draw it with a pen? Do you draw it on a computer?
Yeah, I started off doing them on paper with these pens, and then gradually started doing more and more of the editing and redrawing and rewriting on a computer. And so then there was a point when I switched over to just drawing the first draft on the computer directly, using one of those big. There's a big tablet. I see. The direction is.
Oh, like that's nice. Is that a Cintiq? That's nice.
Yeah.
Sweet.
But so there was a point when I changed over to using those completely, and that was nice because it freed me up to do some much larger things. Before, when I wanted to do a big chart, I had to have a whole bunch of pieces of paper that I would scan separately and stitch together. and like if I had to update something, it was a huge pain, and so the nice thing about drawing directly into the computer is that I could make much larger comics, which was fun.
Interesting. So you use a Cintiq and you just draw it directly on there, and are using what are you using to draw? Photoshop or Illustrator?
Yeah, I use Photoshop. Everyone I know uses something different or some different combination of things. It's just like whatever you learned to use is the easiest tool for you.
Sure. Ever think about an iPad with a Procreate or anything like that? I guess
I hear it's incredible. I also heard that the Surface Pro 2 is the Surface Pro, whatever the last.
I love the Surface Pro. We have one. I used it for a long time. It's really nice. I know a couple of artists who sneered at it for a while and then tried it and were like, "This is a really high quality tablet." It's really nice. Yeah.
I have the same Cintiq I've had for now, many years, and I'm not too. I'm. It's one of those things like whatever works for you. People have everyone has a strong opinion about why the way they do it makes is the best, but. I think it's whatever you've learned to make work for you is great. It's the province of the amateur to debate about tools. The professional just picks one and just uses it because they've got work to do. And we don't. That's why we're just gassing on and on. I'll let you go. Thank you, Randall. Sorry, but it was great talking to you. Nice to talk to you too. You're just one of my heroes. No, it was a lot of fun. It really was a great chat. Have a great day. Thank you, Randall. We invite you, if you like Triangulation, boy, this was fun, wasn't it? To join us every Friday, usually every Friday, about 11:30 Pacific. That's 2:30 Eastern Time. That's 17:30 UTC. We come in here in the studio and we sit down with somebody interesting. We spend an hour or so. It's not just me. When I say we, it's Jason Howell, it's Denise Howell, it's now Micah Sargent, and I think Ant's very nervous about doing the show. We're going to get Ant shoehorned in, and they pick the people they want to interview. I always pick the people I'm most interested in, and that's what makes it interesting. It's a real conversation between
our hosts and people were really interested in, and I hope that you're really interested in. You don't have to watch live, though. That's only if you're in the mood. And if you do that, go in the chat room at irc.twit.tv. The live stream is at twit.tv/live. But really, the easiest thing for almost everybody is to watch. It's a podcast, right? That's the whole idea. Watch or listen on demand. We do audio and video of everything. All our shows available at twit.tv. Our website, in this case, it's twit.tv/TRI. And you can download a copy of any of our hundreds of shows. This is episode 412, so there's 411 other ones. You can also subscribe. In fact, that's probably the best thing to do in your favorite podcast application, and that way you'll get it automatically the minute it's available. You won't miss a single one. There are some really, really good ones in the past, too, that you go back in time and listen. We're glad you're here. And I'll see you next time on Triangulation. Bye-bye.